for now a deep dive into each one of those components, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry.
Thanks, Jason. Well, let's kind of kick things off by starting with Advanced User Security Mapping, affectionately called AWESOME. And this is a very popular product and portion of our admin suite. And it basically bridges the gap between WebCenter content security and your enterprise security model and solves a lot of those business problems, tech problems that Jason was mentioning earlier. It's the only out-of-the-box supported solution to integrate WebCenter content with third-party single sign-on products as well. And it also extends that LDAP 80 integration so you can interpret additional directory information such as attributes, organizational units, and group memberships to help define that access. Also enables users to delegate and elevate user capability to sub-administrators and import and export rules. So there's 5 key areas that we're going to talk about in our slide deck here before we demonstrate how AWESOME works. And they are directory configuration, which is where a large number of situations pop up with LDAP groups that are getting out of hand and unwieldy in your organization, and default mapping to those LDAP groups. Control and ownership, be it an IT security team versus an application owner versus a WebCenter content admin. Troubleshooting issues with content access. Sometimes there's administrative difficulty in finding out and triaging why I could not get at the content I was supposed to get at. And improving new user provisioning and some initial inefficient setups and configuration we've seen with our customers that reported back to us that say, I've had trouble onboarding new employees. And last but not least, auditing user access, so you can find out who has access to what content. And these are the problems that we go after with solving them from a WebCenter Advanced User Security Mapping perspective. We have some key considerations to highlight here. So we do some comparisons over each of these 5 key areas from a pure out-of-the-box LDAP integration perspective to an Advanced User Security Mapping integration perspective. And the first and the main purpose of this project is allow those additional grants and removals or denials of the content server user roles, accounts, and aliases. So if you're familiar with the content server security model, you have groups, roles, and accounts, and the intersection of those 3 make up the accessibility I have as a user to get at my content. And you can use a combination of those 3 to get the granularity you desire in your environment. But what happens is, a lot of times at the LDAP mapping from LDAP to the content server using the @ group name _R, RW, RWD, and so forth, tends to generate a lot of different LDAP groups. So that main problem proliferates, and if you take, say, 50 different groups that you might use, multiply that by 4 to get the right combination of access you need, you've got 200 LDAP groups that you have to populate resources into to make that security model work. It's quite a bit of IT overhead and quite a bit of a challenge from a triage perspective. We automatically sync information between Advanced User Security Mapping and LDAP as well, so the user information between the directory and the content server is synchronized to require that you ensure up-to-date data information is retrieved by the user and the access is capable and extendable to that user. Synchronization can be driven either by users in the content server, database, or LDAP server, and can be scheduled or on demand. I'll actually illustrate how that on demand works later. A key best practice recommendation from our perspective is also trying to use attributes in your LDAP repository more so than you can in more granular groups. The idea of doing that is if you take that 50 example and you multiply it by the 4 read, write, deletes, you get 200 groups you have to maintain. If you can maintain a small number of groups, say less than 10, and use them as true roles such as a contributor or reviewer for that department of that business, and use department of business as an attribute, we can evaluate that attribute that they belong to as part of the rule for Advanced User Security Mapping to make it easier to manage the total cost of ownership of your security access. I'll illustrate that in our demo here today. Second in our list is the access control. So in our second point regarding this, we have situations where granting or blocking access to content in most organizations requires a change within an LDAP directory, which means the process might unfold such as a ticket would get opened and possibly via the help desk, and which in turn moves into the IT security team. The IT security team will then validate what groups the user has access to by looking at their AD. They might contact the user and ask them which content they're prevented from viewing, and also email the primary approver or owner of those groups to validate who should have access to what. This might involve eventually the content server administrator at some point, who happens to be would expect to be the most knowledgeable individuals who knows who has access to what content. Such a request could take hours, days, weeks, depending on the complexity of your security model and your procedures and processes for triaging and resolution. These are lengthy periods of time, and they can tend to bog down satisfied users and your overall adoption of your content server. Advanced User Security Mapples enabled content server administrators to manage user access with rules, which in turn manages the content and the people that have the access to the content. So it's a matter of where that line is going to be drawn in your organization. Provisioning through IT security and managing content and secure access through the content server and business people who know it. The main issue to take away here is security is a provisioning role, and we're trying to put the accessibility and the true ownership of the content access in the right person's and individuals' hands so that you can respond quicker when there are issues and people are either realigned or not in the right place. Because people do move within your organization, and if you are moving within your organization, you need to request and deny access, in some cases rather quickly. And so those rules are manageable on the fly to prevent those and help those situations. From a troubleshooting perspective, there's always, I take that example I mentioned a little bit earlier, that the one major problem that does come up when you are trying to triage those issues is that you have to ask the user, in some cases, what their security access is. If I'm an IT security person and I'm responding to a ticket, I might end up calling that user, and the main problem that might pop up is, can you send me a screenshot of the profile page where your security access is? One, they might not know that. Two, if they do know that, now they have to interrupt the user to tell the security team what security access I have. It does not sound like a very nice problem, situation to be in. So alternatively, if we can provide a method for you to evaluate those permissions and put those permission ownerships down at a level that you feel are manageable by a business owner or what you might call a super user or sub-admin type person, we can extend that evaluation process to help the triaging, which helps reduce the tickets, which helps to, most importantly, trigger access to the content and improve the user adoption and not get your users into a frustrated state of ownership. Adding new users, this one pops up quite a bit that we've heard from our customers in this third scenario. They said it can be a bit of a challenge to do this. And so kind of, if you think back to how this situation might be rolling around in your environment, how many times have you seen where a new resource starts and there are inevitably issues getting access to things they need to do their job? Not just access to the content, but maybe access and provisioning to other systems. So that can be a bit challenging. That doesn't leave a good impression on newly onboarded employees. And if you're like Fishbowl and value our continuous improvement core value, you look for ways to try and make the necessary adjustments to improve those situations. Another example is there might be times you want to refresh user attributes on demand instead of waiting for them to be refreshed later. So depending on how often you set up your refresh schedule, you can do an on-demand synchronization to get my new roles and privileges assigned immediately, and then schedule that on an ongoing basis. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the auditing user access. So there's a scenario where you need to audit access every so often. If you don't, you probably don't have a very complex security model at this time, but we have many customers who share in this complex security model. And there's a feature called Retrieve User Access, which can be done in a number of combinations. It can be done by security group, it can be done by account, and it can be done by search within security group and account to return back the results of who has access under that security consideration. By security group, there's a drop-down box that will list all the security groups that the current logged-in user has access to. So it is context-aware, if you will, of who you are when you're doing this evaluation. You will not see all the security groups or all the security accounts that are enabled in the system. You'll only see the ones you have access to. So if you're a sub-admin or a super user, you'll be at one level of the security model, and you can look down as you're triaging issues and providing user access report for who has access to your content. You can also look by permission level. It's a drop-down box as well that lists the read, write, delete, and admin access permission level that that user might have in that combination of security model access. That button, as we'll show in the demo, will demonstrate where that can show that process working, so the casual user who does not have admin access can evaluate the security access. I'd also like to note that you can export these findings from this report to Excel for sharing those results in a reporting fashion. And I'll also illustrate, we won't demo this, but we can demo this at a one-off if you'd like, or a customer's perspective. We can take a combination of advanced user security mapping and subscription notifier through an admin suite and generate a security information report that automatically would be sent out in terms of what access they have and even what sample content they might have access to. So that helps give you some point in time and some real-time results as about who has access to what information. So let's talk about a brief look at what's new in Release 8.0. If you do not have 8.0 and you want to get it, I'd suggest you get a hold of support as soon as possible. It's got some nice new features in it. But we continue to enhance Awesome as we go with additional features and feedback from customers who are using the product live in their environments. Version 8.0 was released in December 2016. And we list a few of the items here, which we allow rules to be exported and imported, which are very helpful in new development situations. You can test out the rule in dev and push it to your upper environments, or vice versa if you're trying to repurpose different environments. You can allow sub-administrators to evaluate user permissions. Those examples I was talking about earlier. Redesign the rules interface to create and modify rules. And it's also, like Jason mentioned, certified under 12C and 11G. So what I'm going to show you in a demo, I'll show you a brief little snippet of how Awesome works, the user interface page, and how its configuration might work under a couple different scenarios, how assigning security based on rules works, troubleshooting content access, and auditing user access. So I'm going to flip over between my environments here. And what you're going to see is our Show Me Content demo site. And all of our products, just so you're aware, are under the Fishbowl administration, so you can tell what you have installed in your environment if you're not aware. All of our products are accessible here as well through the component manager to manage configurations for them if the component has configurations that are manageable by you. The first one we'll hit is Advanced User Security Mapping and Defining the Rules. So this is the Rules UI for managing the multitude of rules you might define in your environment. There's really no limit of rules that you can manage within Advanced User Security Mapping, but I will say as you create the rules, they are evaluated top to bottom in that order. You can move them around by drag and drop with a simple little interface like this, and I can enable, edit, copy, or delete my rules. I'll open up a few and talk about the first couple in the list here. So this first example grants a contributor role by group. We evaluate the role type of attribute of group. AD group contributor is the defined attribute here, and our role is contributor, and our legal read-write is the account access that we are granting people in this group to the content that's in the content server. So your content would need to be tagged with the right legal account as well as part of your contribution process. I can test the rule out by going through the evaluation process, and it will tell me what rule access I've been given access to, and I can do that for all of my rules throughout my process. I can also do an evaluation by the user. In this case, I'm doing with a Sales 1, and I have denied access to a Department 1 read-only. So I can deny as well as grant access through my rule evaluation. And in order to get the benefit of rules that have multiple attributes assigned to them, you can concatenate things together on a single rule to apply them to multiple people who might be, in this case, a user department of finance, and I can grant access to a multitude of roles that I type into this text box or pull from my predefined content server role list. I can add a number of accounts and varying degrees of privileges on the rule as well, or pick them from my defined accounts. And I can also add aliases that I might want these individuals in the finance department to have access to when dealing with workflow, for example. And I can pick them from my defined content server alias list as well. So in one rule for the entire finance department, I can grant all those privileges for them to do their job within the finance department, which cuts down the number of groups that all the individuals have to be put into on the LDAP repository side of things. I can delete a rule if I don't like the one I've created or if I didn't finish one, and it will clear that rule out of the list. So let me take you over to and show you what an example of that looks like. So I have a Sales Demo 1 user. When I look at their profile page, they have access to the following roles and they have access to the following accounts. In one scenario I mentioned earlier, there was the Department 1 that I was denying that person access to. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to execute that role, and this role that I have here, or this rule that I have here says I'm deny right now, but I'm going to flip it over to grant, and I'm going to save the rule, and I'm going to run my initiation process to re-tag that so I can sync up with my rule definition. And then as I refresh the page and come back to the sales demo individual, that the new department was granted access to advanced user security mapping. So now I have that as part of my process, and I can, in this case, look for a file. This particular asset has been tagged with the security of Department 1, so only people with Department 1 access can see it. This user was granted access, and when I go back and take that access away through the rule denial, and just repeat the opposite of what I did, deny access to that, save the rule, and run my initiation again to get the update out there, because I want it on demand at this point. When I come back and I run that same test again, I will not have access to that document that was tagged with Department 1. So that's just a quick demonstration of how the different rules can be managed and maintained within the content server and provide access through attributes, group mapping, or OU mapping versus an LDAP. There's also, I can perform the evaluate user permissions that I performed while I was in the rule at any time. This is an admin function. And I can even evaluate those rules and those steps within those rules to see how they were ordered and what the user was finally given access to when all the rules have been applied. The Retrieve User Access feature is the one I mentioned that allows you to look for all users who have access to various security groups, accounts, and the permission levels within that combination of those lookup values. It brings back the username, the full name, the email address, and the permissions of that, and allows you to download that file to Excel and share that with other individuals. I can get a different set of results if I look by security group versus account, depending on what your security model is. And again, it repeats all the individuals who have this combination of access. That same feature is available to a user who might be semi-power user or sub-administrator, if you will. So I can retrieve user access on behalf of my department or my group. And these are only the accounts and only the groups that I have access to that I can perform this lookup on. So now I can triage my finance department who has read access to the finance department account. And you'll notice that the retrieve user access is the only option I see versus an administrator who sees all the options.